Thanks for joining us today, everyone, for this training hosted by Housing Solutions. Today, we have Dmitry Vulfovich joining us to lead the session on compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. And the training is going to go from noon to 2 Central. So we look forward to spending the next 2 hours with Dmitry learning about how to turn compassion fatigue into self-knowledge and getting some practical tools to overcome secondary trauma. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Dmitry. Thank you, Dmitry.
Hey guys, Sasha, thanks so much. And it's novel to hear my name pronounced, colloquially correct, although not that many people can do that, but you can call me Dmitry too if you want, but that's really, thank you for using it that way. It's novel. I'll just introduce myself really quickly. I'm a psychotherapist from San Jose, California. I'm originally from Russia, but I've lived in California for most of my life. I've worked in different populations. I have worked with the homeless population, and I've kind of gotten a broad range of different communities and things like that. But I mostly focus right now, my main kind of specialty is working with trauma, working with overcoming trauma, but from like a more holistic and body-oriented approach. And sort of that's my bread and butter. So I believe that's sort of like the cutting edge, the somatic kind of outlook on mental health, and how the like sort of the stress disease model. So how the stress is impacting the vital organs and things like that. So I'll be giving you guys a little bit of that perspective, and hopefully you'll get something new from this. So I will go ahead and start my PowerPoint, and I'll be open for questions throughout, and I believe Sasha may be monitoring the chat window as well, so we can also stop and kind of inquire and be dialectic about it if you desire. Okay, so here we are. Okay, let me just set this up. Okay, so we're good here. Everyone can see? All right. Just gonna move this. Okay. All right, so here we go. Okay, so I usually like to start off with this quote, and it is, if your compassion does not include yourself, it's incomplete. And I like to start there because I think a lot of this has to do with, as we go into burnout and talking about secondary trauma and things like that. Obviously, the first thing that people think of, this antidote to burnout, is obviously care of self and self-help and how to take care of yourself. And I like to start off on this note because I think a lot of times we're taught to, like, the compassion is usually, when you say compassion, it's something that is typically an outward expression. So like usually people are feel like, oh, compassion for homeless people, or compassion for this child, or compassion for this victim, or compassion for, it's always an outwardly expression of love and understanding, but rarely do people know how to do that and redirect that empathy back to themselves. And I'll be kind of sharing with you ways that you can to focus that inward. Okay. And so one of the best ways to understand self-compassion is to become more familiar with this internal family system. This is I don't know if many of you have ever encountered this yet, but it is a kind of a very popular therapy model right now. It's very kind of, I don't know, hot and kind of cutting edge. But basically, the internal family systems model looks at what's inside of you. So you know how we have family systems, traditional family systems is we have, your family system, your parents, your grandparents, your friends and family, and all these things that you're involved with. Well, the internal family system is the internal system of parts within you. Okay, and so this is actually goes back to like Gestalt model and stuff that's kind of early in the 60s that came out of Fritz Perls. But this type of thinking has to do with like seeing it. Oh, okay, I have a sad part, I have an angry part, I have an introverted part, I have an extroverted part, I have like an internalized mom, I have an internalized dad, and so within you, you can see yourself as sort of a congressional community. And one of the ways that you can see mental health is through this parts model, which basically says that within you, there's a community of parts. And if your parts don't agree, meaning that if you're divided within yourself, meaning that you have like kind of an adversarial relationship with yourself, different parts of yourself are in disagreement or they're fighting, well, that creates tension and discord, and that creates sort of anxiety and these types of things, suffering. Looks like there's something in the chat. So one way to look at this sort of holistic way of seeing mental health is that ultimately what it means for a person to be healthy and happy and well is really for their parts to get along. And so basically their parts, if your parts all are in one kind of mobilized into one flow, then you're integrated. You have inner peace, meaning that everything inside agrees, and that you're not that's what disintegration means, like you're not integrated. So integrated means put together. And so when we talk about self-compassion, it's important to see that that there are different parts of you that may not like other parts. And I'll just briefly go over this because this is a whole thing you might want to, I encourage you to look into it on your own, maybe read about it because it's sort of a long model. But one of the ways that you can see this as, this is a little breakdown of it. So in this model, there's the first part, this is the exile. And this is the younger wounded inner child carrying the burden of painful memories. So usually this is like that tender, hidden, vulnerable, hurt, defensive, scared part that we all have. And whatever way it shows up, it's different depending on how you were raised and whatever. But usually they've narrowed it down to the exile. It's the part that you've kind of shunned away. You protect. I'm not good enough. I am vulnerable. I'm unlovable. I'm not worthy. Usually it comes along with sadness, hurt, shame, loneliness, grief, loss, dependency, anger. So this is that part that usually it's like a blind spot. We usually try to hide this part from ourselves and from others. And then if you look, so that's the exile. And then if you go to the right, firefighters, this is the part that protects that part. So it's the reactive protector part. When the exile are triggered and the scab is off and the wound is bleeding, they try to soothe the exile by bleeding wound or distracting from it. So and this part shows up as addiction, disassociation, anger, vengeful, promiscuity, retreating, hiding, self-harm, violence, binge eating, drinking, compulsion, obsession. So like basically there's another part that kind of tries to avoid the pain by going into this firefighting place. And then there's another part, if you go around to the left, it's the managers. And these are proactive protectors. Parts are trying to keep you in control, stop you from feeling the wound of the exile. This is the part that's controlling, planning, inner critic, judgmental, pessimistic, people pleaser, perfectionist, anxious, procrastinator, high achiever, caretaker, depression, panic attack. And so that's a different type of protector. This is more the more controlling managerial part. And so, and these are the parts that also act to protect from feeling this exile part. And then at the core is this what they call the self, or the person's core or center. And this is the place where we want to be more so in a state of compassion, calm, curious, connected, confident, courageous, creative, and clear. And so this is just an introduction, but I just want you to start to think about that within you there are different parts. And not as the client, but even as just as a person or as a provider, you also have your own internal process. And you have to, in order to, especially in order to survive in these kind of conditions where you're helping people with mental health issues, you have to look at your own insides and your own internal parts so that you can support yourself. And then this is a much more detailed and intricate way of looking at yourself inside. Okay. So that's it. Let me know if you have any questions about this. But the simplest way to look at this is that, you know, if you wake up in the morning and you're anxious or something, or you're not feeling well, you're kind of you know, you're depressed or sad or anxious. A lot of times what people do is they wake up in the morning and then they start to criticize themselves. It's the manager part. So for instance, you wake up in the morning and you're feeling kind of anxious. A lot of times what people will do, they'll tell themselves, why am I anxious? What's wrong with me? Like, God damn it. Like, why can't I just get up and be normal, you know? And so then you're kind of, instead of like, you know, treating that anxiety and saying, oh, interesting. Like, let me just support myself. Let me connect to this sadness, anxiety. It's the manager that kicks in and says, why are you feeling this way? This is bad. You know, what's wrong with you? And so that there's another layer of aversion on top of this feeling of sadness, and that's the critical part. So that's an example of ways that we can really make it worse by being an adversary to our own feelings, by being critical to ourselves, not allowing ourselves to have our feelings. And I'll get more into that, but that's an example of how this actually plays out. All right. So is this making some sense to people, or how are we doing? Okay. All right. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take a step back and that was just like a little bit of an introduction of what I'm going to be talking about. Now I'm going to just take a little step back and kind of go from the beginning and really talk about what we're doing, what we're up against, and kind of what the helping profession is all about. First thing as I want to do is I just want to kind of talk about what compassion, what this profession is about. So the first thing is compassion satisfaction. So that's just something that I like to bring up, which is basically like a way to look at why we're in this field in the beginning, like why you even chose to care for others or in any capacity. And these are some ideas of why you'd want to do that. So first one is pleasure and satisfaction derived from working in the helping profession and caregiving roles. Feeling good about giving. So you may have a certain identity that's generated from being from the helping profession, so that you may feel like good about yourself. You may feel connected to the community. Reminding you that there's people who maybe work with jobs that are completely disconnected from the community. Like there may be some kind of products or computer things that are maybe not really have anything to do with the community at all, and so that people sometimes will have a lack of meaning after years of working in a job that doesn't really have a sense of contribution at all to anything that is real for them. So that there's something in it for us when we are part of the remedy, when we support our own kind of environment. And we also, connect and work with our colleagues. We have a sense of collaboration and a sense of unity, doing something together that's impactful. So that's something that we love doing, and that's definitely something to remember of why you're even here. That does contribute to mental health and your sense of worth. And again, that belief about yourself, that you're a healer or you're a giver. And whatever you want to call it, whatever your identity is, that sense of altruism. And also to remember that it's okay that you're doing it for yourself. It's this whole cat and mouse game, because, you could try to tell yourself, oh, well, I'm doing it out of service. It's not about me. But then it's, you can come back to the kind of the ego thing of, well, I'm going to be the best, the most selfless person in the world, and that within itself is sort of egoic, to be the most selfless person. So I just come to terms with the fact that it's self-serving to do good things for other people, and it makes you feel good about yourself. So, and that's okay. Don't run away from that. It's okay to feel good about it. And do it because it makes you feel good. Like on the one hand, it's almost like there is some tangible benefit. Like you can measure the outcomes in your communities. Like you can measure the amount of poverty, and of course there's some impact. But also realize that some of this work is just ongoing, and there's there will always be people who are not well and poor and sick and things like that. So just keep doing what you're doing and keep loving what you're doing, and you're not, don't try to save the world, because you'll be dissatisfied with your work if you rely too much on seeing these immediate results. So that's compassion satisfaction. And then I'm going to go into and kind of just really identify what compassion fatigue is, and because I think it's worth going into a little bit. I'm not going to drag it out for too long. I really like to talk more about ways to get out of it, not so much of kind of what it is, but I do want to define it. So let's first go into burnout. So burnout is differentiated against secondary trauma because it's just a little bit different, although they're related, but there is a delineation. So burnout is helping to the point where it feels self-destructive, okay? You may feel a sense of hopelessness, you may feel ineffective, nothing I will do will help them, you may feel exhausted. Overextension is a primary component of burnout. It's doing more than you're available to do. That's very seminal in burnout. And I'll be talking about how to keep an eye on that and making sure that you're not overextending yourself. As a result, you may feel like you're going through the motions. and sometimes even feeling resentment towards your clients and staff because you're kind of in this burnout state. So you feel that's resentment is another byproduct of overextending yourself. I'll talk more about that later. Um, and and then also burnout has a gradual onset and may come and go. Another important thing that we'll kind of narrow in on even more so is the somatic component of burnout, which is the body-oriented symptoms of burnout, which may be like a headache or a mood swing or a fatigue, stomach ache, things like that. You may feel it in your body, which is, I'll go into it later more, but it's really just like a check engine light on your car. It's like something that it's notifying you that there's something's up. So it's a good sign actually that you have body symptoms. So that's burnout. And then there's secondary trauma. Now, secondary trauma is a little bit different from burnout because it has more to do with some kind of emotional trigger that is specific to you, not whereas burnout is just a general overexhaustion and kind of overextension. Now, secondary trauma is more trigger specific, and so you may feel frightened. You may have preoccupied with thoughts of the people you're helping, like you may be thinking about that person a lot more than usual, intrusive thoughts about them, and it's specific to you. So what I found and I've been interested in traumas, for the last 10 years, and what I've realized is that people usually get triggered more so when they've had similar situations themselves. So if a certain process for the client, like if something is triggering about a particular client and their situation, particularly with some kind of abusive situation or their children or something like that, you're going to have a stronger reaction to their story or their experience if you've had that yourself. So if you've had some similar type of abuse, or there's something that is particularly reminiscent of yours in the way that they talk about it, or even the way that they appear, or the way that they look, it may trigger your own or reignite or inflame some process that's still maybe unfinished or unhealed within yourself. And so that's what secondary trauma stress is, shows up as when it's especially in the extreme cases. Naturally, if you haven't had been triggered in a certain if you don't have a certain trauma yourself, hearing a person's trauma may not necessarily trigger you. I mean, that's why, therapists, we go day in and day out, we listen to people's traumas. We don't always get triggered by them. So secondary trauma isn't particularly just hearing somebody else's trauma, because we do it all the time. It has to do with having your own inner trigger that gets kind of hooked along the way. Okay. And so that's why it's important to, if you are triggered by somebody else's trauma, then that's an opportunity for you to go and get some support, and maybe an opportunity to do some therapy on yourself, and not so much as just to survive just to survive your job, but maybe there's something in it for you that's actually useful, perhaps as an evolving person. Perhaps something would be beneficial for you to continue to heal. And that's an opportunity, really, is an invitation for you to continue to look at yourself and heal old childhood traumas or whatever. So I want you to look at it that way. Don't see it as something that you have to hide from or hope you don't get it. It's more like, if you are triggered by your client, then let's maybe stay curious. The other thing is to consider is that I like to explain what hypervigilance is from my like holistic perspective. So hypervigilance is, when people are startled, like startle effect. You've probably seen it. So like when somebody like slams a door, the person kind of twitches and gets jerks over and looks over. So what it is it's when a person is anticipating danger, and a lot of times it's sort of there's an evolutionary component to it. Like if you were something fell on your head, or something dangerous happened to you and you survived it. I always bring up this example of like the metal door falling on a lady's head, and then her surviving it and going to the hospital, and then coming back to work a month later or something, and then she would start to hear down the hall much more. She would her hearing would increase, and basically what her nervous system is doing is it's basically saying like, whatever I need to do to make sure that dangerous things like that don't happen to you ever again, I'll do it. So if that means increasing your hearing so that you're more alert, that's better than you getting hurt again. And so hypervigilance is actually, from a biological and evolutionary perspective, a very like wise and useful thing, right? So like, your body doesn't want to die or get hurt. So what it can do is it can make you more vigilant and more hyper aware so that doesn't happen. Of course, now to the person, that's a really annoying thing to have to go through, to live in a way where you're startled by every little noise. But I think that having that perspective helps, because you can start to support your nervous system to start to deregulate it. And de-escalate your nervous system to reinforce safety, and reinforce in your nervous system that things are okay now, and doing more mindfulness, more calming your nervous system, and to really but validating it too, validating that, oh wow, I'm hypervigilant because I'm caring for myself. This is not an attack on myself. PTSD is not an attack on yourself. It's actually a preservation of yourself. And that goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, when I talked about that sort of parts work, that in general, most of all mental health symptoms are not enemies. Like depression and anxiety, most symptoms, they're not. Traditionally in the medical model, we're taught that, like, you're supposed to go to war with your symptom, get rid of this, get rid of that, fight this, fight cancer, fight your depression, get rid of this symptom, get rid of that symptom. It makes sense on a practical level, but on a more holistic and kind of more well-rounded perspective, the body is just doing its thing. The body is doing what it needs to do to protect you, and kind of demonizing your body and saying this is a bad symptom, when there's actually a mechanical and evolutionary component that's embedded into your body, doesn't make sense. So you're better off listening to these symptoms and trying to understand them. That makes more sense. And so the secondary trauma stress, you may feel it in your body. You may feel, after talking to a client, you may feel like a tension somewhere. And that's when your body is signaling to you that there's something up. And the other thing is, you may find yourself kind of having a hard time separating your life from your client's life. You may kind of be thinking about it when you come home and staying up all night thinking about them. Again, I would invite you to ask yourself, like, to see if you can feel this deeper, and try to understand what's in it for me. Why am I so triggered? And is there something that it's reminding me of in my own life, or something like that? And some people also get numb as an effect of it. They may kind of just shut down, which is another. It's the other side of hypervigilance. It's a different type of symptom. You may also have irrational fears. You may not want to get into a car, or some people don't drive on freeways anymore after a certain accident or something. They take kind of the long way home. And secondary trauma stress has a sudden onset. So as opposed to burnout, secondary trauma, you may be feeling perfectly fine one day, and then you have like this triggering client or person you're helping that triggers you in some way, and then you can have this onset right away. So that's secondary trauma versus burnout. Does any questions here? Does that make sense? The difference between them? Sometimes I ramble fast, so I just want to slow down, make sure you guys can catch up if everyone's kind of on board with this. Okay. Yeah, I also want to make sure this is relevant for you guys. Okay. All right. So, okay. So, yeah, and if anything comes up, any question comes up, just chat in, and then I'll be looking out for it on the chat window. But I'm going to keep going. Okay. So, so at this point, I also want to kind of get into more into the somatic component of this. This might be helpful. So the first thing is, okay, so whether or not you've heard of somatic psychology, it's just a component of psychology that deals with how the body's impacted by the stress. You've probably heard this term in any case, even if not in psychology, but you've heard when you go to your doctor, they'll say, oh, it's a psychosomatic symptom or something like that. Psychosomatic means that psycho is mind and somatic is body. So mind body is what psychosomatic means. It's the more medical term, even though you often hear mind body as a self-help kind of hippy dippy term. But it is a science. I mean, it's so the best way to explain it is that when a person's stressed, so like for instance, if I was to stress you right now, like if I was to like intimidate you, or if I was to scare you or become violent, like if we were in person or something like that, if I was to stress you in some way, your body would naturally you would get into a sort of a protective state, more of a fight or flight state, depending on the severity of the stress. And when you're in a fight or flight state, okay, your body secretes hormones to keep you alert. The two primary hormones that you secrete when you're stressed are cortisol and adrenaline. Okay, so those hormones are really nice hormones for becoming alert, running, getting away, fighting, surviving something. And they're really great. And they're also good for the body. They in moderation. They are actually anti-inflammatory, and but the problem with cortisol and adrenaline is that when your body is subjected to those hormones chronically or persistently for long periods of time, those hormones are, first of all, they are immunosuppressants when they're secreted consistently, so meaning they lower your immunity. Think about it, like you can't be like ready to fight 24 hours a day. Like your body will start to, it's almost like you're borrowing something that you really need to like plenish. So basically imagine you being on guard to fight 24 hours a day for days on end. It lowers your immunity. It's called immunosuppression. Okay. And so when you don't have immunity, your natural immune system, your body will naturally go to the weakest link, so that those organs that are naturally weak and don't have immunity will start to suffer disease. And so a person that is under stress chronically will develop physiological problems, like whatever it particularly is weak in their body. But a lot of times the common ones are, hypertension, stomach problems, fibromyalgia, you name it. It goes into cancer. Wherever the body is weak. Somebody says Lori says this is what a police officer deals on a daily basis. Yeah, exactly. And people who are in the military, things like that. It's rough unless you learn how to kind of calm yourself. But so basically that's the main point, is that that's how your mind can get you sick. But it's not really your mind, it's your mind-body connection. But it's when you're stressed out for consistently and chronically for a long time, it will deteriorate your body. And also the current research shows that when you use up your cortisol, like let's say you had a really stressful childhood and you're a really stressed out person, after years of being really stressed out, what they've been showing recently that I've read is that your cortisol gets depleted. So you actually run out of your cortisol. And then a lot of these medications that people take that are that treat like asthma and fibromyalgia and different like heart disease and things like that, well, it's actually cortisol based. So you actually, the meds that are treated, like one of the most powerful medicines that people take for many diseases is cortisol based. So you actually, people who are stressed out run out of their cortisol, and then they get sick, and then modern science gives them cortisol based medicines because their cortisol is depleted. It's kind of ironic. Tower says this is also a very common pattern for our clients. Lots of fight or flight moments day after day. Yep. Exactly. And what I want to invite you guys to is, and we'll go into this boundaries portion of this training, is that what I want to invite you guys to do is to make sure that you're not following in that fight or flight, or joining in that fight or flight, or being caught in that system of being overly stressed because your client is. So you have to learn to actually invite them into the other direction by actually exemplifying and being more calm and being more mindful within yourself. So then at least you have a sort of a counter invitation. It's like, hey, you can be stressed, but I'm going to be calm, and come with me if you wish. I'm available if you want to come this way. Come and join my world, so that you can at least be a different alternative reality for them, a calmer, more present reality. I had my primary care check my cortisol level to check it out. Oh, cool. Somebody says, Pamela says, also vitamin D and B levels as well. This has been very helpful to my self-care management. Cool. All right. So, okay. So soma means body in Greek or Latin or something like that. So every moment in every event is recorded physiologically. And particularly stressful events create holding patterns in the body. So that's the other thing I want to mention, is that when something stressful happens, like let's say if you get into a fight or you get into a car accident or there's an earthquake or something stressful, or even berated by your parents when you're a kid, a lot of times your body will brace because that's what you do to kind of survive it. Well, when you brace like that, your muscles kind of contract and you create holding patterns. And they're like tense ways that your body tenses. And then what happens is it becomes habitual. So anytime you get stressed, your body naturally goes to that holding pattern and that muscle tension. And so over time, that becomes a consistent point of stress. And so that that's where your stress collects. And so then you may have like, chronic back pain or chronic headache or chronic, that's where that stress usually goes. And those are called holding patterns. We have Christy says, I am a caregiver for my husband who has TBI, PTSD. I now have secondary trauma. Everything you have described is me. I have the most intense anxiety. At times it just feels like nonstop adrenaline dump. He was in the military. Then I became sick. Christy, I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully hopefully what I'm going to be sharing might help you. Yeah, so holding patterns are ways that the body tries to protect itself through muscular armor. That's the bracing that I'm talking about, okay? And so now, but the good thing about it is that when you can identify holding patterns, that gives you an opportunity. So that's why I'm going to teach you guys something called body scanning. It's a meditation. But the cool thing is that if you could become more attentive to your body and become more aware of those sensations in your body, those holding patterns, the solution to them is to actually pay attention to them and to connect more mindfully to them, because they're almost like wanting to be attended to. That's the only way to heal them, is to actually feel them and connect to them, because so that's the good thing, is that there's hope. There's hope if you have tension in your body. And so listening to the body mindfully can lead to healing and release of holding patterns. That's the point. When you can be mindful to those holding patterns, they can release. And that's the whole kind of more, body oriented healing modalities that are available. Not just massage, but actually mindfulness too. There's a conversation that's going on. I'm not sure if this is okay. I'm just gonna keep going. Okay, so all right. And then the other thing is that to look out for in yourself and in your clients is micromotor movements and general postures that say a lot about a person. So, and then yourself too, I always, when I talk about like assessments and things like that, or asking people how they're doing, even just how are you is an assessment, I guess, if you're trying to help somebody. But what I say is that there's a lot more going on in their body, whether they like to admit it or not, or whether they even know it or not. Because what people talk, the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and the stories that we tell other people about ourselves are sometimes just stories, but the body has a little bit more truth in it. Like, for instance, if a person comes in and they're like, you're like, how are you doing? And then they're like, oh, I'm doing wonderful, I'm doing great. But they have like a frown and they're slouching over. Obviously they're not, So keep note of that. And also for yourself too, like if you're noticing yourself, the way when you look at yourself in the mirror, or the way that you sit, or the way that you feel inside, there's something going on. If you can feel it in your body, whether or not you'd like to believe it or not, whether you have a certain story going on in your head about how you're feeling. And sometimes there can be a certain sense of denial about how you're feeling, but the body is never going to lie. The body is always going to give you the most accurate reflection of how you're doing, if you can just stay connected to your body. So that's that. Um, and the other thing is, so trauma is not defined by the event, but rather by the person's reaction and story they tell themselves as a result. So keep that in mind when you're working with people, and also with your own traumas and things. Is that um, it's not defined by the event. Like people, both on the spectrum, people can go through a really horrific life event and come out of it pretty good, like more or less feeling okay. And then on the other extreme, you can have somebody that went through a really benign event and something very mediocre and nothing that was too dangerous, and develop some pretty serious PTSD or trauma, or even being berated by your mom as a kid for just dropping the milk or something like that, can have long lasting effects. And so don't judge a person's sense of mental health or trauma based on their on paper what the trauma was, but more so about how they internalized that, what kind of story they told themselves, what sense and meaning did they come to make out of that event. And so that I think that it's important to look at a trauma that way, because there's a little bit more compassion and understanding, instead of being comparing other people. Oh, well, this person went through that, or I went through this, so this was nothing compared to that. Like, I invite you, don't do that. Don't compare. Just see people in their own individual life and how they were able to manage and cope through things, and for yourself too. However, the thing is, the reason why I point that out is that sometimes it's a deterrent into healing, because you start to mentally intellectualize this type of stuff and start to compare. A lot of times I have people who come in who have trauma, and they don't even know or have a clear picture of what it is that happened, for instance, or they even have like a pretty hunky-dory kind of life memory of growing up. Like, for instance, the client comes in and says, oh, I don't know why I'm so sad and depressed. And then, you ask them, well, what was your childhood like? And they're like, oh, well, I grew up in a good neighborhood. My parents were nice, just like all the other parents. And everything was good. Nothing I can say. But like, if I take them inside and I, invite them sort of like to introspect or connect deeper to their feelings, they may discover maybe a sense of loneliness or abandonment. And they really can't tie that to any particular event, other than just maybe a moment where they were in their room as a kid, and their parents were busy and they felt lonely or something like that, and uncared for. All it takes for somebody to have some kind of traumatic event is just a missed moment, something that was their need wasn't met, something they weren't paid attention to, they didn't feel cared for, and that's it. And all of a sudden they have this emotional process that starts that can have an impact on them. That doesn't mean the parents were bad. It doesn't. And so that's why I think sometimes looking at it from the perspective of like comparing to other parents or comparing to other situations really doesn't help, because it doesn't allow the person still has to attend to that tender wounding that had happened, regardless of the context. And so sometimes the context can be uh, a way to distract the person from healing, because they're just not, they're like, oh, well, this can't be, but the feeling still is there. That feeling of abandonment, the feeling of sadness is still there. So I say, don't look at that. Just go into start caring for this pain, and figure out how to soothe and heal those feelings, instead of trying to compare them intellectually about whether or not it was comparable, the trauma, to others. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's that. Okay, so I'm just going to move us along. So what is anxiety? So anxiety, it can be traced back to the German root word Angst. That's where it comes from. And And the word angst, the definition actually is defined as the narrowing or choking of breathing passageways. Okay, that's literally what it is. I mean, by the original definition. So it's anxiety is actually like the narrowing of your breathing. And that's probably why people, you know, when they are anxious, they have trouble breathing or they're not breathing well. So as an experiential right now, you can try with me for 2 seconds, tighten your stomach and your throat. You can kind of, you know, take a deep breath and then just tighten and hold your stomach and your throat. Okay, stop. So that's a direct feeling of anxiety. And so the reason why what do you guys, how was that for you guys? Any reactions? The reason why. Yeah, the reason why I bring this up is that so many of us are tense and tight inside, but don't know it. Right, suffocating. So, because here's the thing. Again, going back to the whole body-oriented thing, when a client comes in, and I want you to use this for yourself too. I want you to focus on you, not so much as treating your clients. But when you say I'm anxious right now, my next question is, how do you know you're anxious? And where do you feel your anxiousness in your body? See, it's good to identify because a lot of times I ask people, how do you know you're anxious? I don't know, I'm just anxious. Well, let's find out, because you can't just feel anxious without having it in your body somewhere, because your sense organs are the only thing that lets you know how you feel, right? So you can't be anxious and not know how you're anxious. So if you actually take a deep breath and just notice where you feel the anxiety, you will find it somewhere. It'll be in your chest, it'll be in your stomach. And once you can find where it is, you can actually start to attend to it. Because you can't deregulate something. I mean, sorry, you can't regulate something without knowing where and what it is, right? You can't regulate your anxiety without knowing where your anxiety even is. So the first step is identifying where you feel anxious. And once you can identify where you feel the anxiousness, then you can kind of treat it. So for instance, if you're feeling anxious in your heart, or if you're feeling anxious in your stomach, or if you're anxious in your shoulders, or wherever you feel anxious, you can even put your hand there, or you can use it, you can close your eyes and do it just with your mind, but you can just start to breathe and feel and attend to that area. And anytime you attend to an area, it will start to soothe. It's like putting your hand on a child who's crying, you know, just by attending, you will, yes, just consciousness, awareness, just natural consciousness is a curative within itself. Just natural attention, loving attention will regulate. But you have to focus and identify where you feel that tension, and then attend to it. And that will immediately de-escalate the situation, at least a little bit. You may have to stay with it a little bit longer if you really want to flush it down to kind of natural grade peace, but even in a momentary sense, you can kind of find some relief. Okay, so I'm glad you guys dig that. All right, so, and then taking a sweeping inventory of your body, that's something that we'll try to fit in at the end too. Recently, it started giving me headaches, and I just felt like the life was sucked out of me. Yeah, sorry to hear that. All right. So, okay, so this will be helpful. So here's some tools for survival. So the first thing is I like to say is that come to terms with your suffering. Like don't try to brush it off. If you're not feeling well, if you're stressed out, like acknowledge to yourself the impact of the stress, meaning that um, you know something about being okay with not being okay is better than not being okay with not being okay, because it's like a double. It's a double negative. So if you're not feeling well and then you're not okay with it, then it's like I'm not feeling well and I'm not okay with it and I don't want to look at it. It's like it makes it worse. But if you're not feeling well and then you're like, okay, you know what, I'm acknowledging I'm not feeling well and I'm ready to kind of turn to it and attend to it and at least meet it. There's an okayness with your not okayness, and that's already the first step. So the first step is come to terms, like acknowledge. Don't try to deny. Denial is sort of resistance to it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there's like a 60-second rule. I don't know, some people say 30-second rule, some people say 2-minute rule, but basically we talked about cortisol, and so this is how long. It's about a minute or two where before the cortisol activates in your blood. And so if you find yourself ruminating about something or being caught up in something negative, that's kind of a dead end thought, if you will, something that is not going to get you anywhere. If you can redirect as soon as you can, that will be better, because if you stay too long, it will activate the cortisol, and by that time you will have these residual effects of the cortisol, which is like fatigue and things like that, and low mood. So sometimes that's why sometimes people, like when they were really stressed out for a while, they, even after they stop thinking about these things, you may have like a really like heavy day the rest of the day, and that's because the cortisol is still flushing out of your body. And so be on the lookout for that. Don't try to pull your head out of it before, by being mindful. Like, okay, wait, what am I doing? Like I'm just thinking this over and over again. Like I need to, like, sometimes it helps to maybe like go change the scenery, take a shower, or go for a walk or something to like snap out of it, because you can get yourself kind of stuck sometimes, and then it'll be worse later. So yeah, changing the scenery, the setting. Again, that's kind of like that first point, allowance of your feelings, which is different from feeding into your thoughts. Allowance of your feelings has to do with the feeling of the actual, like, sadness or anger or the tension in your body. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but basically what I invite you to do is allow your feelings, but don't feed into the thoughts, which is kind of a strange paradox. But if you can learn to do that, that's really the way to go. You want to allow your immediate experience in your body, but then not entertain the intellectual ramblings. So that's that. Perceptions and beliefs. Also take a look at what you're telling yourself. Not everything that you tell yourself is real or true. Okay, that's just something that you have to kind of wrestle with. A lot of the thoughts that you have or beliefs that you have, you later look back on and you say, oh, well, what the heck was I thinking? Like, that's not even true at all. And that's okay. I think it's healthy to have a certain sense of discernment, or maybe even having a certain kind of looseness about, okay, well, this is what I believe right now, this is what I think now, and I'm okay with that, but let me just keep an open mind that that may not be true later or something, so that you're not so stuck on your beliefs, because your beliefs they can be false, or you can have false perceptions of things, or you can have a lack of information about yourself or about other people, which can lead to like assumptions and things, that can stress you out. You can get suspicious. That's one of the difficult things, is like humans, we get really suspicious about other people, and then we create negative stories about them that may or may not be true, and then kind of we can stress ourselves out about it. And so, you have an opportunity to decide how you want to, what kind of temperament or attitude you have about certain situation. You know, particularly with malicious activity like crime, or people who, homeless people, the kind of people that you guys work with. It's up to you how you want to perceive a situation, but I would say that you at least have a choice. So, you can judge them. You can judge another person. You can say that they're evil, they're bad, or there's something wrong with them, or something like that. It may not be true, but sometimes I ask myself, like, well, what's the benefit in me thinking that? Like, does it really help them, and does it help me? And I've often come to terms with the fact that yeah, maybe they're bad, but I'm also a judger now because I'm judging them. So I have to reckon with myself being a judgmental person now, which is a thing that I have to own and take responsibility for. And in a lot of ways, I think compassion, I can always go back to, well, this person's committing a crime, but maybe they're traumatized. Maybe they have mental health issues, and maybe they're not bad people. Maybe they're not evil, but they're just sick. And if I can look at it from that lens, I can have a little bit more compassion. And that kind of thinking, I think, is healthy, because maybe perhaps there is no such thing as evil. Maybe evil is just a word we've created for behaviors that we don't like in society. And maybe our society is just sick. Maybe a lot of criminals and a lot of people who do malicious acts are maybe just it's from a protective defense mechanism of trauma, and they're just in a state of survival. I mean, I don't know. But for me, I think it's I have to keep an eye on how I'm perceiving things and what kind of beliefs I have about myself and other people. And some beliefs may not have any benefit to me: judgment, suspicion, hatred, things like that. So it's kind of Buddhist, like compassion, have compassion for people. But I think there's some benefit to having that kind of thought. And also going back to responsibilities, focus on what you can control. Stay self-focused. You can do a lot more benefit with having that as a utility. Like, what am I doing? What can I do to impact the situation? And stay focused on yourself, instead of trying to figure out what they could do, what they should do, and things that you can't change. There's no utility in that. And that's what can stress you out at night, thinking about them. But if you want to think about what you can do, there's a lot more pivot there. I could do this, I could do that, I can try this, I can try that. There's a little bit more focus and control. And then also let go of the need for people to be different, and really like respecting other people's refusal to get well, or to be different, and that we call that dignity for their choices. And particularly with homeless people, you have to keep reminding yourself that they get to decide to suffer, even if they want to. That's part of their human right. If they want to suffer, if it's almost like we have privilege, right? And no matter how, even if you're not rich, you have privilege. If you're not homeless, you're privileged more than a homeless person, because you have a home to some degree. So there is privilege. And so we're kind of inviting homeless people into privilege. We're saying, hey, look, privilege is a state of mind. You can get there. But also you have to respect that they may not want to, and that's okay. And there's nothing that we can't shame people or be resentful towards them because they don't want to improve their life. So you have to remind yourself of that, because sometimes it can be like, come on, you know, but that's a stressful thing, you know, the come on thing. um, so yeah, come on. Yeah, and so instead, just be a role model. Again, like I said, you can invite with your being by modeling wellness, modeling calm, modeling self-determination and things like that. Then they can be invited to come with you, but they can't be forced. Okay. I like this quote I just threw in here. A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. So I would say, you know, be open to adversity and things like that. Don't have an aversion to, try not to have an aversion to adversity, because you know, hardships and difficult situations they define you. Oh, right. I'm glad, Christy. Yeah, you know, it can ruin relationships too. You know, not just in your profession, but in family. You know, a lot of people, especially people getting old, and you have caregivers that get really resentful towards them, especially if, you know, if you're an old person and you've had a long life and you don't want to make any lifestyle changes as the doctors have recommended, and you don't want to take your medications. And you know, I've seen families just have such a horrible time because the kids who are taking care of their elders are just really upset and resentful towards these old folks who just don't want to comply with medical recommendations. But you know, you got to, there's some level of dignity that you got to have for people, you know, and their refusal. It's their life, you know, and they get to refuse. And maybe you spend the rest of your days just being loving instead of being controlling, or trying to get them to improve. You know, it's a hard thing. You know, really is. You got to have a lot of heart to be able to watch your suffering person that you're caring for. But all right, okay. But here's how to think about it. I like to call it self-determination. That's what we call it in the Board of Behavioral Sciences, for people in the caring profession. But self-determination is honoring people's self-determination. It's basically believing in the dignity and personhood of every being. It's an ethical principle in the helping profession. Most licensures have some kind of tenet of self-determination. Like, you're not supposed to give advice, you know, like most therapists can't tell the client, oh, you should get a divorce or something. Of course, they could provide some information about, you know, domestic violence or, you know, but you can't really tell somebody what to do. That's actually a basic principle, and sometimes we lose track of that. People are a lot more resilient than you think. And the other thing is, sometimes when we try too hard and we don't let people have their self-determination, we end up working harder than them. And then we kind of, the problem is we stress ourselves out because we kind of, you know, experience burnout. And also we rob their ability to exercise their strength, right? Because we're making it harder for them to actually, you know, we're making it easier for them to do the work that they're supposed to do. Like, we're doing their dirty laundry type of thing. And it's really kind of a codependent tendency in the healthcare profession, in the caregiver role. And it's actually, I believe it's a problem across the board. I've seen it, especially when I first graduated from my counseling school. And I started doing my my internship and stuff in a lot of these, you know, mental health agencies. This is, I believe, a big problem across the board, probably where you guys live and work too. It's this above and beyond attitude that sort of is pushed And it's one thing to care and be community minded, you know, and really have a sense of purpose and trying to solve these problems in society. But you have to be really thoughtful about how you're going about it, because it's the oldest trick in the book, you know, like you disable people by doing things that they're supposed to be doing themselves, you know, like your child, like people, you know, if you don't create some kind of simulation for how to overcome adversity, people will never learn it. It's the same thing with children. Like if you raise a kid and you don't set boundaries for them, you don't make them do their homework or get a job, your kid is going to lay on the couch until they're, you know, 40 years old or whatever, you know. Like you have to allow people to overcome their own personal adversities, and that's how they learn. Somebody says, I spoke with someone this week who was feeling more overwhelmed and lost because people he had worked with had done everything for him rather than engaging him in his work and giving him skills. Yeah. Yeah. So like, this is what we have to learn to do, because it helps us and it helps them. It helps us not be over involved and stressed out and burnt out. And it helps them because it helps them to build more long-lasting skills that will lead and increase the merit that those skills have in other situations. So for instance, if they have a certain paperwork to fill out or some application for a job or whatever, you want to do aid and assist in a way that can help them learn to do it on their own. Okay, so because that's gonna, if you're trying to help them, that is help. That's the kind of help that's going to be long lasting, not just a patchwork, not just let me just help you get by. That is actually doing more damage than where they're at, because what it's doing is it's disabling them and helping them become more reliant on the system, and so that they're less and less capable of doing anything on their own. So you have to be really thoughtful about how you help, because it actually hurts you and them. It's a double whammy. It makes you more tired, and it makes them more disabled. So this is really important. I believe that boundaries are the most pinnacle and kind of cornerstone of burnout and fatigue. I'm glad, Tia. So don't work harder than your clients, or your kids, or anybody in your life, really. And also believe in them. Thanks. People can be uncanny and surprisingly resourceful. Okay, that's the paradox, is that try to believe in people, and even if they struggle is okay. Like let them struggle, and see if you can set healthy, loving limits. See, it goes back to that conversation I talked about you know, your belief about people who committing malicious acts. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have boundaries. It's about setting loving boundaries. It's about saying, hey, you know what, I can't do that for you, but I can do this. Like, I can be helpful in this way, and I really care about you, but this is what I'm available for, and this is what I'm not available for. It's not about like saying, well, screw you, you do it on your own. Like, it's about how do I set a loving limit? It's like, it's the same thing with a child. It's like, you know, your child can be a real jerk. You know, they can, like, you know, hit you and hit the siblings and this and that, and you still have to be loving because you're a parent, right? So you're being like, okay, you know what, I love you, but you know what, you lost your playtime today, and you know, this is not okay, but I still love you, and I'm still going to be here for you, but you know, this is the consequence. So that's the whole idea. Like, that's what you want to, how you want to see your clients too. It's like, you want to set loving limits without resentment. Somebody is asking, what are some of the effects, examples of generational trauma? How I see generational trauma is something that's passed down in family systems and with mannerisms and things. So the easiest one is parenting abusively. You know, if your parent, if the parent deals with negative behaviors, with hitting and yelling, and that's how they do it, that kid grows up and does it to their child, and then that kid grows up and does it to their child, so it gets passed down. That's an example of generational trauma, abusive family systems. Until when, you know, where it stops is that when one person grows up and, you know, becomes a therapist or something, and then realizes, oh my God, I don't want to be doing this anymore, or they meditate, or somehow some self-awareness process leads them to not participate in that anymore and stop that generational trend of behavior. That's that example. Is that enough? Does that make sense to you? Is that good enough as an answer? Lori says, I have had this training numerous times, but you give it a different perspective. I appreciate that and how you have presented this. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I always think about it like, oh, I hope that I'm not redundant. Okay. So that's that. You're not a savior of the human race, rather a collaborator. So don't think that that you're the only one that can help people, and that if you set a limit for somebody, that somehow they're gonna like be tarnished forever. And you know, that's why people have this grandiose idea that like, oh my God, I didn't do this for this client, now they're gonna be like, you know, dead on the street. It's like sometimes your limits are actually really beneficial for them, because it really teaches them to be more resourceful. So for instance, if you say, well, you know what, I can't do that for you, then they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, now this person can't do this for me. What else can I do? I can ask somebody else, or I can go do this, or I can try it on my own. Or, you know, it creates critical thinking when you say no, because then they have to be resourceful. Nice. So yeah, I want to remind you that your no can be a very valuable adversity for people to overcome, and it doesn't mean that it's going to harm them by you setting limits with people and letting them be more self-determined. Okay. Okay, so let's move on because we're running out of time already. Okay, so I want to bring in this Zen kind of principle. I'll try not to take too much time for this because I know we only have like 40 minutes left, but this could be a day-long seminar, by the way. But this is a concise one. So life occurs naturally in sequence with a beginning, middle, and end. In Eastern philosophy, there's a little bit more organicity in their philosophy of life, whereas the Western view of the world is a little bit more architectural, or more like, you know, material. So in the East, we in Taoism and Buddhism and, you know, just the general Eastern philosophy, not necessarily religiously, but more philosophically oriented. In the East, there's this idea of flow with nature, flow with life, and the easiest way to understand flow is allowance. As opposed to resistance, which is more of like a clogging of a flow. And so allowance is learning to allow life to unfold without fighting it or attempting to make it stay the same. Makes it more smooth and flowing. And so what I'm inviting you to do is if anything that you gain from this training is this allowance, this sense of how can I be more okay and allowing of my feelings, my anxiety, my low mood, my sadness. You know, it's really the worst thing when something happens and you have, you know, this sort of swelling of emotion, you're about to cry, and then you go and you swallow that down and you stop it. Like, I think that's really damaging to the system and to your own organism. Um, you know, yeah, impermanence, um, things, things, things change, and those feelings won't stay there forever. But just allowing them to move through you is very healthy, because if you swallow them down, what they do is they kind of get lodged in your mental parking lot or whatever, and then they just stay and persist there, and they kind of become repressed. And you know, you'd be surprised. I mean, you probably all know this, but you can suppress feelings for a long time. I mean, I have clients who come in and they're grieving somebody's death, and I'm like, when did they die? It was like 15 years ago. And I'm like, oh my God, you're just now beginning to grieve 15 years ago that this happened. And that's how easy it is to suppress stuff. You literally choose not to feel. And so I'm encouraging you not to do that. It's not healthy. It's not healthy to your system. You can think about it as, the coolest analogy that I've come up with is that, like, we human beings, we are a product of, like, the earth, right? We've come out of this organismic evolution of the planet, whatever, however you want to see it. But we are very similar to nature. We come out of nature. So, like, if you look at your veins, they look like your veins and arteries, they look like rivers and creeks. There's a lot of similarities between your body and the way that nature works, branches, and it's all part of the Earth's ingenuity. That's where we come out of that. And if you think about it, like, if you juxtapose your veins and then the creeks and the rivers, it's the same process. Like, if you look at a creek or a pond that's, like, clogged up and there's no movement, if you look at a creek that's clogged, you'll find that it gets really nasty. It has all these bugs, and it gets dirty, and there's all this, like, weird stuff, and, like, I don't know, green, weird, foamy stuff, and it's like it's not well. But when you unclog the creek or whatever, the water becomes crystal clean, right? It's got movement, it's got flow, and that's a healthy creek. There's really no difference in your body at all whatsoever. Your body is designed to be circulating your blood. This is why people get on dialysis and stuff like that, because your body needs to be circulating, cleaning itself out consistently. This is why it's important that you have a good bowel movement, and that you can urinate and you can breathe. And so your body is a constant, like, flowing state. And in the same way that if you couldn't go to the bathroom, you have this resistance to flow. It's the same thing with your emotions. So you want to maintain flow, and the lack of flow leads to disease. And that resistance is disease. So allowance is basically, if you want to think about it, the simplest way you think about it is allowance is health and resistance is disease. Just out of face value here. Somebody says, that's what I did for years, manifested in severe anxiety, carrying the weight on my back. Yeah. So okay, so with that allowance, when you have an uncomfortable feeling, you don't feel like you have to change it or fix it right away. Sometimes just being with the feeling and allowing it to be is really all you need to do sometimes. Just presence. You don't fix. You don't to have a solution, some kind of mental, thing to do about it. And it's almost like a validation. Validating your own feelings instead of fighting them. It's kind of like when you tell your friend, oh, I'm something negative about yourself, and then your friend says, oh no, you're really great, and then you're like, no, you know what, you're not listening to me, like, stop trying to talk me out of my problems. We do that. We tell our friends to validate us, but we also need to validate ourselves too. So if you're feeling unworthy or ugly or sad, validate yourself. Be like, yeah, I know that's, wow, that sucks that I'm feeling that. Let me just feel this out. Validate your own feelings. That's kind of what allowance is. And I have this chart that I created, the best I could do with PowerPoint. But so basically, like, this is what my teacher calls the universal flow perspective, and you can think about it as yourself as this is you, this is your system, your body, and this top arrow is life, and the confluence of forces like the unfolding events and feelings and things like that. And so think about it like life kind of flows into you. And there's two types of resistance that are present. The first one is the pushing away, like I can't feel the sadness, I don't, like sort of a denial and pushing away. And so that's the first level of resistance. And so this is where you want to allow this feeling to move in. And then once you allow the feeling, it goes into you, and then it goes into your heart area. And this is where the second point of resistance is the clinging, the holding on. Oh, I won't let this go, the resentment, kind of longing or clinging. And so this is where you have to release. And so it's almost like, to be in a flow state, you have to allow the feelings, and they have to be felt, and then you have to release them. So you're not pushing away, nor are you holding on. So you have to have both of these channels open, and it's good to be aware of in both of those ways. If I am clogged up, if I'm resistant in both of those ways, in the pushing away and the holding on. I know this is kind of abstract, but it's very powerful to think about it this way for yourself. Okay, does this make sense? All right. Actually, explain a tad more. Christy, do you can you maybe something more specific that you how else can I is anything that help me elaborate on it? So we're good then? Oh, okay. Yeah, so just to recap, the two types of ways that you can get resistant or tensed up is by pushing your feelings away or holding on to them. And so as life kind of moves through you, you wanted to be aware when you're pushing your feelings away. So you want to allow your feelings, and then once you feel them, you also want to release them once you felt them, so that you're not holding on, clinging on to any kind of resentment or any kind of negative feelings. So you want to be in a constant flow, so that you're almost like a hollow vessel. Things are coming in and then they're being released. That's the way to look at it. Kyle, I've heard of RAIN. That's an accurate acronym, right? Some kind of, it seems like I've heard it a long time ago. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've heard of it. It must have been like 5 years ago or so, a long time ago. Somebody brought this up. Tara Brock. Okay, recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. Yeah, that sounds similar to this. Cool. All right, I'm gonna keep going. So this slide I should have put in the other one about beliefs, but in any case, I like this quote by Don Miguel Ruiz. He's like a his Mexican, I don't know, South American kind of guru. He wrote 4 agreements and things like that. But I love this quote: "Every time I judge someone else, I reveal an unhealed part of myself." I really love this. It's this idea that, you know, we project onto other people our problems, and you know, there's something irritating us, so we blame other people for it. Oh, it's this person, or why do they do that? You know, and then instead, really, it's something or we have within ourselves, some hidden irritation about ourselves. So we project. That's one of the most common defense mechanisms, and it's usually like, and it's not I'm not trying to, you know, we all do this, and it's a blind force, you know. Hypocrisy, it's a blind force, you know. We don't do it maliciously. I don't think anybody is hypocritical on purpose. I think it's usually like a blind subconscious thing that we all do. But it is good to keep an eye on that when you have a problem where you're judging someone else on the outside, and to ask yourself, well, what's it to me? Like, why is it a concern for me? Why do they need to be different? Why can't they wear this purple hat? Or why can't they be overweight? Or why can't they be underweight? Or, you know, whatever it is that's going on with them. So, okay. All right. So boundaries, really important. So healthy boundaries are essential in caring for yourself and not building resentment towards others. Okay. We do not know our own limits and boundaries. If we do not know our own limits and boundaries, we end up doing things that we don't enjoy and resent ourselves and others for it. Sorry, I'm stumbling my words. Basically, when you don't set boundaries for yourself, you end up resenting other people. But really, you're kind of resenting yourself if you think about it. Because if somebody asks you to do something and you don't feel available to do it, you don't want to do it, and then you do it anyways, then you kind of you become susceptible to resentment, because then you have an expectation. Maybe you want them to do something back for you, and then if they don't do that thing that you want them to do, then you can kind of blame them and say, you don't do anything for me after all everything I've done for you. But really, I think the most important thing is to only do what you really are available to do. And then you won't be resentful towards people, because it won't matter whether they do what they do back. Because, of course, you don't want to create a transactional attitude. You don't want to commodify your goodwill. You don't want to do things for other people and expecting something for it. And we all kind of know this. A lot of us were taught this, you know, probably in like elementary school, you know, like do things from the kindness of your heart, you know, don't expect gifts in return. But I think sometimes we forget that, and that kind of attitude creeps up, especially, you know, in marriages and relationships and things like that. We kind of tally and you know, add out the things that we do and expect the same from others. But it's important not to do that. And one of the ways to do that, to get away from that, is to really be more attentive. And going back to mindfulness, going back to your body, is that if somebody asks you to do something, you need to check in with yourself. Not, you don't need to. I invite you to check in with yourself and to ask yourself, is this within my highest integrity? Do I feel available for this? Does this excite me? Does this feel good for me to do this thing? And if it is, then you can do it. But if it's not within your integrity, then it's good to have solid boundaries to say, you know what, I'm not available for this. And then you're not longer entrenched in that system. But you know, that's a real sign of maturity, when you can own that. You know, I'll give you an example. For instance, like, let's say you and your friend, or you and your partner says, hey, let's go for a hike. And then you know you think to yourself, I really don't want to go, I'm kind of tired, but you decide to go anyways because you want to please your partner, or I don't know, for whatever reason. You go, and then you're up there hiking, and all of a sudden you're like, you get really tired, you get really pissy, you get really, you know, irritated, and then you start taking it out on them, like, oh, you dragged me here, I didn't want to be here. And that's what I'm talking about. That's this sort of resentful thing that happens naturally. But what I invite you to do is, as a sign of maturity, is to turn that inwards, and if you can catch yourself at least acknowledging that, hey, I chose to go, I accepted to go on this hike, and I'm actually irritated with myself for not having proper boundaries, for not saying that I'm not available when I wasn't. And now I'm here, now I need to take responsibility for myself, but I'm here hiking and I'm tired and I shouldn't have even come, but it's not my partner's fault. They simply invited me. But that's the kind of, that example is just one of many where we go along with things that we are not really interested in doing, and then end up blaming external factors or external people for those things. But we actually have a lot more control than we think. Okay, does that make sense? And I also think that boundaries are a sign of integrity. And I think, you know, something to also think about is that there's such thing as the nice guy archetype. I don't know if you're familiar with archetypes. Are these like kind of, you know, platonic forms, or these I guess themes, or themes in people. Well, there's such thing as the nice guy. Well, there's probably the nice girl too, but the stereotypical nice guy, he's not really a nice guy at all. He's actually just somebody who kind of like manipulates and says yes to everything, and really tries to get, you know, manipulate the world to his liking or to her liking. And so, but they don't have integrity. You know, somebody who can say, hey, you know what, I'm not available for that. That's integrity, to be able to be like, okay, you know, this I can do, this I can't do. But to say yes to everything, there's usually some kind of hidden manipulativeness, and obviously manipulation comes from a lack of worth, because you need to rearrange the outside to make yourself feel better. So anyways, this is a long topic, but what I invite you to do is practice your no. Be okay with saying no to things, especially if you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're not interested, if you're not available, if you have back pain, or if you have reason to not do it because it's not benefiting the person, your client, or whatever, in whatever fashion you feel like doing something for them wouldn't benefit them, and you just set a limit. Make sure you practice that. Thanks, Susan. The other thing about boundaries that I want you to understand is that boundaries are something that you set for yourself, not for other people. Okay. Sometimes people get the wrong idea. People say, "Oh, I set a limit with that person, and they crossed my limit." Well, I think the solution to that is to actually think about boundaries as something that you set for yourself. Then nobody can cross them. Because a true boundary is something that you don't need the cooperation of other people. That's a much more powerful way to look at it. Because if you think about it, like, a boundary is something that I set with myself. For instance, the boundary that I'm setting for myself is that I'm not available to be around people who are violent or vulgar. Or the boundary that I'm setting for myself is that I'm not available to be around people who abuse alcohol or something, for instance. Then it becomes more about the boundary for me. Okay, if I'm not available to be around those people, then whenever somebody is drinking abusively, I'm going to leave. See, that makes it, there's a lot more versatility there. Instead of trying to get somebody else to stop drinking so I can feel better about it, that's a boundary with them. So for instance, let's say if my partner or if my friend drinks alcohol. Now, a poor boundary would be to say something like, hey, you know what, stop drinking, because when you drink you get really mean, and I don't like being around you, so really, like, I'm sick of it, stop drinking, and I hate it, you have a problem. Okay, that sounds like a boundary, but it's not really a boundary, it's just a request, it's just a complaint, it's a grievance, whatever. And they're likely to drink, and they're likely to cross my boundary with them, or whatever you want to call it. But that doesn't help. What helps is, this is I'm going to demonstrate the other side of it, which is how to set a real firm boundary that no one can break. Is to say, hey, look, imagine I'm talking to my partner, and I might say, hey, I know you drink, and I respect that, and I respect your lifestyle, but in order to take care of myself, I'm just going to let you know that I'm probably not going to be around if you're drinking. It's just something that I need to do for me, because it doesn't feel right to be around you or anybody that's drinking to that extent. So just so you know, I might be excusing myself at times if you see me. That's why I'm doing it. I'm just declaring it for you what I'm going to be doing. So that's untouchable. I don't need anything from that person to set my own limit. I encourage you to think about boundaries as something that you set with yourself and for yourself, not with people and for people. Because real boundaries, you don't need the cooperation of other people to hold them. And that's when they're solid. Does that make sense? All right. All right. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, we have 18 minutes. Okay. So the other thing is taking responsibility for yourself. Okay. So one thing is that I like to delineate is there's a difference between being responsible and being responsive. Okay. So being responsible is we must take responsibility for ourselves only. Our thoughts, actions, and perceptions. We are responsible for everything happening that originates from inside ourselves. We are never responsible for the reactions of others to ourselves. We are responsible for nothing that originates from outside ourselves. Okay, so you are only responsible for yourself, your feelings, your thoughts, your actions, your beliefs, what you do. Okay, and but not for other people. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be responsive. See, that's the thing. Sometimes when people, that's why it's important to kind of really have nuance, because when people say, oh, I'm not responsible for your feelings, and these are yours, so then the other person feels like they're not empathic or attended to, and we don't want to be cold with people. See, there's a slight nuance that I think is very important, because we also want to be responsive. And responsive means that we can respond to others or our needs, to desires, or situations. We may choose to interact, participate, get involved, or to help out of desire rather than from responsibility. We can be responsive to others while not being responsible to others. Okay, and the difference is, if somebody's like, if your client is feeling sad, or your family member is feeling sad, to be responsive is to be empathic, to say, oh wow, it looks like you're having a hard time, like, I'm here for you, like, I'm being supportive. That's being responsive. Now, responsible means that this sadness that you're feeling, somehow it's mine. Like, I need to do something about it because I've caused it, or it's mine. I have to do it's almost like it is mine. I have to take responsibility for it. Okay? And so it's important to discern those two. Those are two different things. And just because somebody's having a hard time doesn't mean that you're responsible for them. But you can be responsive. This really helps when you're working with people and burnout. Does that make sense? And then I like this chart. It says those of us who take responsibility and ownership for ourselves will be able to be free to resolve our issues and make changes. Okay, so taking responsibility for ourselves. As long as we have tried to make others responsible, we will be dependent on them changing before we can change. Okay, that's why you don't want to rely on other people to change. Okay. Somebody says it's hard when being blamed for things to not feel responsible. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the hardest thing, you know, when somebody's blaming you for something, it's like you have to work extra hard to look within yourself and ask yourself, and do I feel responsible? Is this something that I can own or not? And you have to check in with yourself and to say, you know, is this something that I did? And if it isn't, and if you kind of inquire within yourself, then you just have to let them be in their blame state and carry on. But you have to inquire within yourself about whether you can own that or not. And sometimes you do. Sometimes when somebody says, "Hey, you're really mean," or something, and then you have to say, you know, am I mean? Like it's all, you want to be inquiring of yourself, like, am I mean? And then sometimes you will find that, you know what, sometimes I can raise my voice, or sometimes I can be kind of critical. You know what, you're right. I don't like the way I do that. So sometimes you can stand corrected if somebody's blaming you, but sometimes not. Sometimes people blame you for things they're projecting, and so then you have to say, you know what, I don't find that within myself. I don't find myself to be mean. So you know, thanks for your feedback, but I don't feel that way about myself. Yes, you have to be mindful with yourself. Yeah, people's blames are projections, and sometimes those projections are accurate when when you really are what they say you are. Sometimes you are. You have to be open to that. I guess when somebody, here's how I see it: when somebody criticizes you or praises you, it's an opportunity to inquire and see if it's true. Because it goes both ways. It's not just criticism that you have to inquire about within yourself. It could also be praise, because sometimes people will praise you with an agenda. People sometimes will praise you to get something manipulative, like they'll like kind of, you know, quote unquote blow smoke up your butt, like they'll say really nice things about you. So I think it's important to have an internal compass about who you are, regardless of positive or negative feedback. So if somebody gives you praise, you still have to be like, okay, well, am I a nice guy? You know, I'm nice, but I'm not that nice, you know, like, or whatever. So it doesn't matter what kind of feedback you get. I think it's important to be mindful and inquisitive within yourself about like whether you believe that about yourself, even independently of their feedback. And then reference that with what they're saying and seeing, oh, is this useful? Is what they're saying beneficial? Does this resonate? And if it does, sometimes their feedback is true, and you can use that to work on yourself. Or it could be not true, and you could be like, no, that's not true for me. Mm-hmm. All right. And I like this quote by Oakman, and it's about boundaries a little bit, and I'll just read it to you. Um, it says, I lied, and I said I was busy. I was busy, but not in a way most people understand. I was busy taking deeper breaths. I was busy silencing irrational thoughts. I was busy calming a racing heart. I was busy telling myself I'm okay. Sometimes this is my busy, and I will not apologize for it. So this goes in line with saying no, not being available to people. I think that's part of the overextending piece that I think people find in burnout in these types of jobs and in their life. I mean, sometimes overextending is a process that goes well beyond your job. It's just something that part of your personality, perhaps, that you just do too much, you know. But doing this sort of conscious attending to yourself unapologetically is vital. And the other thing is ownership of feelings. It's natural to have feelings or reactions to life or to people. Sometimes we can look for opportunities to change how we respond to people and circumstances. Not every reaction you have to everybody is warranted. Okay, so when you're tired and irritated, you may have a reaction to somebody that is not warranted. Okay, and that doesn't mean that you should be having that reaction. So you have to own your reactions. You have to own your feelings. And basically, the reason why is that if you experience anger or sadness, you have to be careful not to necessarily blame or attribute the actions of other people or the situation as the cause of those feelings. Those are yours. So just because somebody did something or said something and you got angry or sad doesn't mean that they made you feel that way. Okay. That is a super important thing, because a lot of times, even in our language, we say, "Oh, they made me feel that way." Well, I don't think that's accurate. No one can really make you feel anything. You can have a different you can have a certain reaction to something, because the actual empirical test to this is that if you have 10 people in a room and you have an event that happens, somebody says something just as an experiment, something happens, some event, and you go around and you ask those 10 people what their reactions were, they will vary because everyone has a different reaction. So that proves that events are more or less neutral in a sense, and people feel the way they feel based on the way that they've been raised, their family of origins, and how they perceive reality, and their beliefs. So it's important to own that, both positive and negative. We're taught to tell our partners, "Oh, honey, you make me feel so good," things like that, which is sort of I guess the most accurate thing would be to say, "Oh, I'm using you to make myself feel really good." And that kind of sounds really robotic, but I think it makes more sense with the negative stuff, like if your child is doing something or your partner is doing something that's where you're feeling irritated. I think it's really healthy to say something like, "Hey, you know what? I'm irritating myself right now," or "I'm making myself really angry right now." That's ownership, and I think that's healthy. If your child is doing something that you don't like and you're getting angry, they're not making you angry. You know what I mean? There's other days where they do the same thing and you were just perfectly fine. And I think in domestic violence situations, this is a big problem, because the wife will do something and then the husband will punch a hole in the wall, and the cops will come, and then the husband will say, "Well, she drove me to it. She made me do it." Something like that. That's a gross example of lack of ownership, but it lives in all of us, the need for to blame or attribute our feeling, the way we feel, onto external factors, and instead of just owning, okay, this is how I'm feeling right now. This is something that I'm responsible for. This anger, this sadness. This is me. I need to be the owner of it. And the cool thing is that it's kind of liberating and freeing, even though it's hard. There's a certain level of maturity that comes with ownership. It is liberating, because if you know that you can make yourself angry, then you know that you can make yourself not angry. When you're the one responsible, you have a lot more freedom and control. Whereas if you're just a victim of forces, if you're just a victim of the unfolding events, then you're just a rag doll. It's whatever happens that makes you feel. You don't have any say or choice in how you feel. So there's versatility in it, in ownership. Does that make sense? Let's see. 5 minutes. Okay. I like this quote. It says, "What we think healing will look like," and it says, "meditating peacefully." What healing actually looks like, unpacking trauma, having difficult conversations, taking radical responsibility for our actions, implementing healthy routines, setting and enforcing boundaries. I like this because it gives a bit of a more comprehensive look at how it looks to kind of heal. Okay. All right, so actually we're kind of out of time, so I'm gonna just end with a little bit of a quick meditation, just to give you guys a little flavor of what I do. Okay, so we have a couple minutes, so this will be a brief, but better than nothing. So I'm going to lead you on a quick little mindfulness journey. So just try to do your best to close your eyes. It's hard to meditate with your eyes open, so close your eyes. And I'm going to just ask you to attend to your body in places where I invite, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to put all your awareness on the touch of breath at the tips of the nostrils. And what I want you to do is just study and track what the sensation is as you breathe, but only at the tips of the nostrils, right where the air brushes up against the nostrils. Maybe it's a tingling sensation, maybe it's cool air, maybe it's warm air. Doesn't matter what it is, but just see if you can stay just at the nostrils, at the touch of breath. And just notice, you don't have to do anything about anything. Your job is just to track and stay focused on sensation, not thinking, not stories, but just a touch of breath at the nostrils. And see if you can just anchor into that, like sort of rely on that fine point as a source of grounding. Any sensation at the touch of breath. Okay. And naturally, from here, I would guide you through the whole body. But since we've run out of time, we can I can send you guys some meditations that I've recorded where I lead you through this. You can try it on your own, but even just the nostrils is a good place to start. If you're feeling ungrounded and anxious, you can just focus on the tips of the nostrils, breathe, and attend to sensation as a way to just be present. And that's it for today, guys. You can start to come out and open your eyes. We've run out of time. I'll be sending the slides and a meditation that you can download, and go ahead and
Thank you, Dmitry. Thank you for great training. And for folks, thanks for participating. Please take a minute to fill out our feedback form. I'm going to pop that into the chat right now, and I'll also send it again when I distribute Dmitry's materials and the meditation videos as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. I hope it was helpful. Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.